Hello and welcome back from the networking break. It's Tom Bechtold, of course, your host from SecureWorld Digital. Up next, we're talking to Mr. Mike Muscatell. He's the Senior Director of Cybersecurity over at Acumatica, Inc. He's going to be talking to us about insider threat actors and artificial intelligence. Now, this is the guy that I go to anytime people want to know about insider threats. So I would encourage you, he's here. If you have any questions, please throw them in the chat. He's here to help you. He can give you a lot of great information about all the different types of insider threat. But we're going to talk about just a couple specific ones today. But Mike, it's great to have you here. Wonderful to have you back on the virtual conferences. Floor is yours, sir.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Tom. No, it's great to be back here. And these are starting to grow some legs, and a lot of folks are attending and asking a lot of great questions. And we encourage you to ask questions. Even during the presentation, if there's something that you hear, type it in right away. That way you don't forget it towards the end. All right. So with that being said, I'd like to welcome everybody to SecureWorld Virtual Conference. We are going to be speaking about AI insider threat today. Not so much the AI itself being the insider threat, but perhaps the individuals who are utilizing it, but not typically in the way that you would think. So a little bit about me. I am the co-founder of an international cyber threat task force. We founded this back in 2015, I think it was, somewhere around there. And it's grown quite a bit. It's turned into more of an international organization more so than anything. But the point of it is it was based on a very core principle of what we do, and that is give back. So one of the things that you're going to find during this presentation is I'm going to be providing a lot of information that you're not typically going to hear from folks like me doing these presentations. And with that being said, I also provided that same feedback, that same give back mentality in an interview I did with Pentest Magazine not too long ago. Great publication. Do check it out when you get a second. All right, so what are we talking about today? We're going to talk about the progression of AI insider threat. Again, we're not talking about the AI system itself being the insider threat, but it being utilized and it's morphing into the activity associated with it as an insider threat type activity. We're going to talk about operational AI threats. So what does that really mean? And think operational security when we're talking about this. Insider cloud threat. So insider cloud threat in terms of hosted services. So a lot of these AI services are hosted services versus running local in your data center or even on your local laptop. So they're hosted cloud services, but we're going to conjoin that with another insider cloud threat that I mentioned prior. We're going to do not quite a live demo. You'll understand why when I get to the content, why I didn't really want to show the direct access. It's very critical to understand the nature of what is going to be shown today, and I'll explain a bit more when we get there, but I think you'll get the idea. I have a lot of great still shots of the activity of interacting with these AI systems. So I think that you'll get something well out of that. And then we're going to talk about mitigation measures. What can you do to actually reduce your exposure level or exposure factor when it comes to the use of AI solutions within your organization or even in your personal life? So here are all the various types of insider threat categories that we commonly hear about, but we're only going to focus on two today. We're going to focus on oblivious, and we're going to focus on negligent. Also, negligent and oblivious, you could probably fit one right in the middle of there and call it inadvertent, right? So if you look up my previous conversations about insider threat, you'll see me talk a lot about inadvertent insider threat. Now, any of these, whether it be oblivious, negligent, inadvertent, can either skirt malicious or become malicious. But we're not going to really talk too much about that in terms of the individual as much as we will maybe about the AI system itself. So artificial intelligence insider threat. So this, when we look at all the different services that are out there, and there's tons of them, and we're going to get into that here in a moment, one of the things that we want to keep in mind is that at the end of the day, the currency associated with these services is not money, it's data. Data is the currency, right? So you may find a lot of these are free. You may find a lot of these are very low cost to use. You may find that there are systems that are willing to give you lifelong access for a very low amount of money. But at the end of the day, it may seem like a good deal, but all in all, it's all about the data. Because without the data, these systems do not progress. They do not get better. But what does that mean? And we'll talk about that some more as well. So I mentioned a lot of different companies. So this is over the past 4 years, actually. These are hundreds of different companies that have come about in terms of AI related type activities. We're not really going to get into any particulars with these specific ones, but what I'd like to talk about today is what I like to call everyday AI. Excuse me. That's my eye. So I'm not going to also mention any of these products directly, but if you see the logos here, you may recognize some of these logos for some of these services. And this is something that we find ourselves either exposed to, being interacted with, or being advertised from with respect to these services. So how does this all interchange? Well, if you think about the way that we interact with everybody within our organization currently, we have all of these different ways of communicating. And we have all of these different ties back to the different types of communication services that we use. But now there's more of a push to kind of centralize that using AI type solutions. So instead of contacting Mary directly, you may be speaking with Bob, and the AI system will go, hey, Mary also had a conversation with Bob about this very same topic. You may want to talk to them together about this. Well, you may think that that's pretty good, man. I didn't know that those two already talked, and maybe we could go ahead and have that conversation. That would be the positive of it. But then you could also take a step back and go, wait a second, that's kind of creepy, a little bit, right? So what is the current employee's experience with cybersecurity? I think chaotic, maybe a good way to kind of describe it. It's all over the place. I mean, people don't like some of the things that they're being imposed upon them with regards to security. And why? It's inconvenient. At the end of the day, that's basically what it comes down to, is inconvenience. People want to be able to do things very easily. They want to be able to freely explore solutions and things like this. But when you're on your own system, that's one thing. But when you're on a company system, there's certain implications that need to be considered. And a lot of times what we find is that the average person is really just trying to better themselves, better their job experience, maybe push some sort of effort that the company's trying to look at with respect to AI, and they really have no ill intent, and that goes back to the oblivious and maybe the inadvertent piece of what I was speaking about with insider threat, because as they progress into these services, they find themselves interacting with them in ways that they didn't realize they were allowed to do, or worse off, they find that they are restricted and they cannot get to some of these things, and so they find other means of doing so. But again, in order to be effective, they have to have data. So now they're going to be taking data out of company systems and putting it into personal systems in order to utilize these services. So that's where we're still looking at the risks associated with what exactly are they taking out. Are they just asking general questions, or are they actually plugging in things that they really shouldn't be doing? So let's talk about insider cloud threat for a second. Big question: who owns the data, right? So the way the copyright law is currently written, it states that all new authored content must be created by a human. So what does that mean if it's generated by a computer? Now, this goes back many, many years, way before AI, because there's been lots of computer-generated services, computer-generated content. But now we're in an area where it's much more intelligible content, it's much more actionable content. And And the way the law is written is it's open source. It's considered open source. So if you have an employee that takes company confidential data, and maybe not all of it, maybe let's just say it's a paragraph, and there may be one sentence in that paragraph that would be considered company confidential information, but the large majority of it is not. And they copy that into these systems. The next question is, who owns the data? We're going to get into a little bit of the terms specifically, because one of the things that we want to be careful about is how we're discovering that data. And also, what kind of flow of process with that discovery of data are we going to see? Are we going to see the data being uploaded via a browser to an online service, or are we going to see it being sent via a personal email or even company email outside the organization? Are we going to see activity associated with cloud services with regards to storage, personal storage, not so much company storage? So think in terms of, iCloud, or even, personal Google Drive versus company Google Drive. So I mentioned the terms a moment ago, and one of the things that I'm finding, and I'm not going to specify which company this came from, but it was on one of the all-day, everyday AI solutions that I've listed there. These guys are telling you what they're doing with their data. And what stood out to me was they're saying, we're going to take an image of your voice. We're going to take an image of your face. We're going to cross-reference that with all of your social media stuff. Oh, and by the way, we're going to sell it to all of our vendors. Now, what I find interesting in these vendor lists that they're talking about is one of them is mentioned is cybersecurity. So there's always been this whole thing where we're doing it to improve our service for you. Are you? Now? Or were you ever? You could say yes to that. You could also say that we've come to a point where that's how we're conditioned. We've been conditioned to accept terms for as long as you can imagine. You download an app on your phone, you download an app on anything, and it pops up the terms, and you're like, yeah, go. So if you think about fast forward to today, all this time that we've been, conditioned to accept terms just to be able to use the service, is anybody stopping to read exactly what they're doing? There's another service, again, I won't mention the name, but they actually state whatever you enter into our environment is ours. Wow. That's pretty concerning, because that particular service is designed to help you with various types of content, to improve that content, to refine that content. And if you're thinking, hey, I'm just going to take this report that I'm doing for the board or for the audit committee or whatever, and I'm going to have it, kind of regenerate it for me to make sure everything sounds okay, what did you just put into that system? Because according to their terms, you can't take it out. So the point is, you got to read the terms. And I want to go back to some historical reference that I had. This is from a slide from way back when I first started doing this topic on insider threats in general. And it talks about securing your data and your intellectual property in the cloud. It's a very good article from CIO Magazine. There's also a law firm that I like to reference here that does a really good breakdown. There's been some other ones since, but this one is still one of the top ones that I recommend, because it really breaks down an understanding of what do you really own, right? When you put it in the cloud, everybody thinks that, well, it's protected by this and it's protected by that. Is it? Are you sure? Because according to the rules according to the data we just read from that other company, they're just going to take all that data and they're going to give it away. Now, I can tell you that particular company I showed that wants to take the voice image and the facial image, they are a integrated vendor of another company that you would actually think that parent company, since they're an integrator, that parent company being that they're integrating to would be responsible. However, their terms state that they have no responsibility and liability associated with their integration partners. So whatever their terms are is what you need to actually agree to. one final one I'll add in here is enterprise cloud data agreements. At the end of the day, folks, everything comes back to the contracts. Everything comes back to the agreements. It doesn't matter what your perception is. It doesn't matter what your verbal agreement is. It doesn't matter what was shaken upon. It matters what was legally signed and agreed to when the service was actually set up. Now, if you are utilizing these services from a personal standpoint, then there's certain personal risks associated with that. But if you're also leveraging those services that you personally have access to, and you're utilizing company data associated with that, then you actually are creating a legal liability for your organization. So even if your legal team is already reviewed the terms and made a determination on the corporate risk associated with those services to determine whether or not even to proceed with those services, then fine. But you also got to ask yourself, are you violating your information security or acceptable use policy with your company by taking this data out and injecting it into a personal service? Now, you're probably thinking to yourself, that's a lot of different activity. How are you even going to see any of that? We'll get to that here in a little bit. So I mentioned the demonstrations. So some of the dark services that are out there, there's what's called dark chat. This one's dark web chat GPT. It's actually called dark chat. There's Worm GPT, and then there's one called dark AI. I have access to all of these. These are all managed and operated by foreign countries, and they're also managed by foreign country governments. So for that reason is why I'm not going to do the actual live demonstration associated with these. But what's interesting is they're selling them as a service. Worm GPT is $200 for a lifetime of access. Well, that's pretty darn cool. You got the other ones that are like, okay, you can get access for 7 days. You can, get some points. And as you get more points, you can get more access. So there's different tiers of access for some of these services. But before you send that credit card information over, you might want to know that Worm GPT belongs to the Turkish government. Just saying. Might not be a good idea to send that information over there. Oh, and they don't accept PayPal. Oh, and they don't accept crypto. They only accept credit card, which I find very interesting with respect to this service. So how does it work? So here is the dark AI service. And among other ones, I have some other agents that are associated with some of these other services that are out there. So what I did is I have one single configuration file that basically can talk to multiple layers of services that are available. And depending on what I'm inquiring about, I can direct the inquiry to one or several. So down here is a single inquiry that I've created that's asking for Telegram specific activity. So if you're familiar with the Telegram service, everybody's like, it's encrypted and can't do this. No, it's more vulnerable than people realize. And there's a lot of data that you can get all the way to location. And the location data is accurate within 1 meter. I thought it was 1 centimeter, but it's actually 1 meter. So 3 feet. So I asked it to give me passwords for a very specific set of criteria. And originally I thought that it was just going to give me the login names and the password, not so much available, just saying, hey, yeah, it's available. But to my surprise, this service actually gave me the actual password and the hash. So those of you familiar with this term called pass the hash, I don't need to know that your password is, whatever this is missing here. I just need this. I just need this hash right here. So I don't need to know, what your exact password is. I just need this. And then I can take and get a whole list of all the hashes that are available. And then I can go and create a ransomware This is generated by the same chatbot. Now, what am I targeting? I asked for a specific type of company. I didn't ask for a specific company. I asked for a specific type of company. And I said, I would like to be able to generate a list of passwords for these types of companies that have been compromised. And now I would like to generate a email with a ransomware exploit associated with these particular companies. So here's the email sender piece. Here's the ransomware piece. Again, all generated by the service. Why is this important? Because remember the part in the terms where it said they share activity data or relative service data in order to improve services and things like this? Well, in my research, I found that some of the companies that are considered cybersecurity companies that are going back and analyzing this data for these companies that are getting these voice images and things like this on, validating and grouping and pairing and just connecting the dots in terms of, validity of the information that's being gathered. They have ties to the very same services that are doing these dark AIs. So you have a legitimate service feeding a not so legitimate service. Why would you do that? Simple. There's only so much bad guy data out there. And you need a continuous source of data in order for any of these things to be valuable. So why not feed it completely legitimate data? When you have the legitimate data and the legal and illegal data, and they're basically using that system to pair them together. So when I say, give me all of the relative information associated with compromised accounts with this type of company, okay? It's not only going to give me all of those that have been part of a data breach database that's accessible with millions and millions of records in it, but it's also going to pull legitimate data of the same type of companies with the same type of user interaction information. And it's going to find some correlation with the breach data versus the legit data. So to put it in a better way for you, if ever you've done a background service check on yourself using services like Intellius or BIM Verified, one of the things it lists in there is not only your family members that you're associated with, but it also says might also be acquainted with so-and-so, and it has some other names associated with that. There may have been a dinner party you associated with, you went to. There may have been an event that you went to and met some of these people and maybe made a connection some way. It also has all of your neighbors listed that live nearby. Could be a current neighbor, it could be a former neighbor. But the point is that for years, there have been systems that have been making correlations of relationships with individuals, and now it's being done on a global scale. So I love the folks that always tell me, I have nothing to hide, there's nothing special about me, I'm not doing anything wrong, so it shouldn't matter. Here's what I like to remind people. Regardless of how much value you think you have, everything about you is of value to somebody. Everything about you is of value to somebody. If you think about how much data has been gathered all these years, everything from where you shop, what you like to buy, all the way to where your mouse pointer is on your screen. So it knows what ads to place in what part of your screen. All of this data has been collected for all these years. And you remember the whole term big data. Well, they needed data scientists to go in and figure out how do we correlate this data? How do we match it up? Well, now we have AI. And AI can build those missing bridges associated with the data. And they can actually create a behavioral profile of individuals on a scale that we've been trying to accomplish for many, many, many years. So now the bad guys have that same capability, right? So I always tell people, think about how predictable you may feel that you are or not, right? And I think now is a good time to start, well, you should have been doing this before, but get a pretty good idea of what your digital profile what does your digital footprint actually look like? So we talk about visibility. And the visibility has to do with, like I just said, your own personal profile, your own personal digital footprint. How much exposure do you have? Well, if you really want to know how much exposure you have, you can go back and use one of those background check services on yourself to make a determination and see how much social media content is pulled back, how much, other relative information. Now, again, this is all public data, but what you're going to find interesting is how much else is considered public data, right? So there's several services out there. There's a few of them that are, not so reputable, but there's some other ones that are pretty reputable. And for a very low cost, you can basically get a general idea of what is available about you, publicly speaking, right? And it's a good start. Is there a way to suppress that data? Yeah, you can use reputation services to kind of suppress that data and reduce the exposure. But you also have to look at how you are conducting yourself, right? Why is that important? Because how you're conducting yourself personally translates to how you're conducting yourself in your professional environment. If I'm targeting somebody or at a company, I need to go after somebody. I need to figure out a way to get a hold of you, right? I'm going to send you a couple emails to your personal. If you answer those or you respond to them, then I know that you may be susceptible to answering or responding to them in your company email. And that correlation information is not too hard to get. But also the visibility lays on the organization in terms of what is being done to protect you from these sort of things from actually occurring. So even if you were to get those emails, how is it protecting you from being able to click on a link? Or is it even getting to you at all? That's what I like to do. I like to prevent it from even reaching the individual, so they don't even have to worry about that link showing up because it's being captured well before it actually reaches the inbox. So operational security. So this is one of the things that I wanted to speak about the most, and that is we have our perimeter defense, we have our boundary defense, we have our web security, we have our email security. So those are all perimeter and thing. But operational security speaks to how do you conduct yourself every day. As professionals in your field, you have access to certain types of information depending on what your job is, right? And some will have more access to more sensitive data than others. And you ultimately are responsible for that data. As a security practitioner, as a security professional, as somebody who runs security for my organization, I'm literally just the oversight committee, right? At the end of the day, I'm depending on you to know that, okay, if I copy this data here, there could be potential exposures. I'll give you an example. I deal with a lot of customers. And we had one of our strategy folks, for lack of a better term, wanting to ingest some data into a system to test it out. And the person who's over that area that contains that data said, whoa, wait a second. This data, there's a very good chance it may contain personal identifiable information. Now, she didn't know for sure if it did, but because of the nature of the service by which that data is obtained, there's a very good chance that it's in there. So she basically reached out to me and said, hey, they're wanting to do this. I feel it may have this type of data. Not really comfortable with doing this. Good on her, right? This is her being responsible for the data that she understands, the risks associated with it. Yeah, it's associated with the customer, that's for sure, right? And so aside from getting customer consent and all that other business, just in general, no bueno, right? Not a good thing to do. So, yeah, there are other cases where there are people who don't think about that. They're just trying to make their job easier. They're just trying to advance their abilities to improve their work environment and their experience. And that's where you come into the inadvertent or negligent, right? They know they shouldn't do it, but they really need to be able to see if the possibility is there. So they go ahead and they copy and paste or they upload something. And so that is where the operational security comes into play, because you think about your security operations centers and these types of services, they're not really watching that. They're not watching for the anomalous user behavioral analytics type situation. They may look at it from the standpoint of, okay, you're logging in at a different time of day, you're logging in from a different location. There's some user behavior analytics associated with that. But we're talking about just everyday use of data and transmission and access and that sort of thing, right? So one of the things that's most commonly looked at is file integrity monitoring, and that is, who's actually accessing the files? Are they changing them? Are they making updates to them and this sort of thing? Now, is this system going to help you with an AI type insider threat? Not necessarily, because all it's going to know is that Mary accessed the file, but she didn't make any changes to it. She just opened it, read it. But that's where data loss prevention is key. Now, there's many, many different services out there that claim that they have data loss prevention capabilities, but they're limited. You need something that's going to have the ability to actually identify the service properly. And this list here is a list of just some of the services in our environment for my company that are considered generative AI. And there's a lot of them, as you can see. So one of the things that we've done is we've actually gone and did an analysis of how this data is actually, how these services are actually being used. We see a trend of access associated with them that would warrant further action, and maybe make some considerations about some rules that should be set in place. So this data loss prevention system, we started out with cloud only. Why did we start out with cloud only? Because it goes back to my insider cloud threat comment, okay? A lot of these services are being hosted somewhere else. So the data is being ingested and sent to them, either through a copy paste of a contact box or the actual ability to upload something. Most of them are key entry, text entry. There's not a lot of whole uploading capability, but some of them do. So we took a look at the trend of use. And then we actually went and said, okay, we're going to create a rule that basically says for generative AI, if you are hosting, editing, data entry, whatever, if you're interacting with this system, we're going to watch everything you're doing. Am I going to block it? Oops, excuse me. Am I going to block it? No. I'm going to do what's called a coaching message. So what happens is, and I don't have a screenshot of this because we had some proprietary stuff associated with it, but what it does is it pops up a message and it says, hey, Mary, we noticed that you could be potentially copying company confidential information to this service. Please select from the three reasons or three options of why, or enter your own. So we're not blocking it per se. We're pausing the activity and we're saying, okay, let us know why you're doing it. Now, could she just type in some gibberish there and continue? No, we have it to where it knows that whether you're typing a real word or not, so that wouldn't work for her. But she could type in research and then hit submit. Could she be fibbing? Sure. Could she be telling the truth? Sure. We don't know that. But here's the play from a psychological standpoint. Now Mary knows that two things. Number one, we're watching. Number two, there's a record of that activity, right? And I can tell you, since we put this in place, we've had a 30% reduction in use of these AI services in a way that they should. Now, you could argue that reduction means that they switch gears over to personal devices, and now they're doing the activity over there. But we have other controls in place that limit the ability to access OneDrive or whatever and actually obtain content to be stored on your local personal devices. So we have other controls around that. And other warnings that pop up for individuals that try to obtain that data. Now, it doesn't stop them from taking a picture of it on the screen or whatever like this, but there is that. So I mentioned the cloud DLP. Then there's the on-prem, what I like to call the client DLP, where it's running on the system itself. And what's important about that, I mentioned the picture. So let's say that somebody opens up a spreadsheet that contains financial information in it, and they don't copy they don't copy and paste the content. However, what they do is they take a screenshot of it, okay? And then they go to take that screenshot and they go to send it to their personal Google Drive or their personal iCloud or even their email, right? The client-based system knows that they opened up a file containing confidential information, private company confidential information, and it knows that they copied it in a screenshot, and it would actually catch and block the ability for that screenshot to be pasted or even uploaded or attached to any other service. So that is the primary difference with respect to cloud versus there's many differences, but that's one of the primary differences between the cloud and the endpoint version of it. So my final thought on this is very simple. Read the terms. You got to read the terms. You got to read the privacy terms. You got to read the terms and conditions. You got to read the data processing addendum for the company. And you're going to find that a lot of these companies have a very low market cap in terms of their legal liability. In fact, I just came across one that had $100 as their market cap or 6 months of service. So if you're renting if you're doing their service and you pay 50 grand, that's their market cap. Unbelievable. I've never seen $100. I've seen $100,000 as a market cap, which is pretty low, right? But the question you have to ask yourself is, okay, if we do need this service and we do agree and they may change the market cap to 100 grand and that's as far as it'll go. The next question is, will our cyber liability insurance cover anything beyond that? So if you're willing to accept the risk associated with dealing with these organizations, and you come to an acceptable level of terms with these companies, then you can do that. The other side of it is what I just showed you with regards to one of the services I mentioned where they say, hey, whatever you enter into us is ours. Well, as it turns out, we really need to use that service where we are. We really need to use it. So we have the cloud's DLP watching everything that's being put into that service. So we have had some people, like 5 people in the last month, that have copied and pasted something into the service and it popped up the alert on them, right? They reached out to me directly, say, hey, I don't understand why this is happening. I went through and read what they had, and I'm like, oh yeah, it says right here, blah, blah, blah. I'm like, oh, I didn't even see that. And again, it goes back to the whole paragraph, 1 sentence kind of thing. So again, it all comes down to the contracts. So you yourself may not be the one to read the terms. I can tell you in my position, up until probably the last 5 or so years, I really never read the terms. I left that to legal or I worked directly with a paralegal to do that review. But now I'm finding myself joined at the hip with legal to look at all of these various aspects of these services to make absolutely certain that they have our interests in mind as well as their own. And so far, I can tell you, out of 5 that I've looked at in the last 6 months, only 2 of them have had our interests, where the other ones were more one-sided for theirs. But it's not uncommon. You're going to see a lot more of that going forward. So, cyber situational awareness. We talk about this a lot. How you're identifying yourself, what you're accessing, how you're connecting, the pattern of behavior, right? Pattern of behavior is more important than anything today, because that's what it's really about. It's about understanding your pattern of behavior in order to utilize data in a way that trains these systems to be, well, more human, right? More interactive, more generative. I go back to this slide. I love this slide. It talks about the physical attributes of what we do when we talk to somebody in person, for instance, and we see somebody coming towards us. We may lower our tone because we don't want them to hear. We may move to a different location because we don't want somebody to see that we're even talking with that person, right? Or the conversation needs to continue, and we don't want to be interrupted for whatever reason. The point is all the physical attributes that we take into consideration when communicating with somebody directly, in person or whatnot, needs to be applied. That same thought process to cyber, right? What we're doing digitally, and make absolutely certain that we're thinking about everything because it is a shared responsibility. And that's why I tell people always stop and think before you connect, especially before you share. But that will open up to questions.
Excellent. Thank you, sir. Always a great presentation. I'm curious, though, I want to push one of your other slides out real quick. Of these four, obviously we only talked about two of them today. What would you say is probably the most common one within organizations?
I would say that there's a growing presence of more negligent than oblivious. And the reason I say that is because of the point that I made with regards to people being blocked from being able to explore a lot of these services. They don't like it, right?
Right.
So they're going to take action to do what they know how to do. And users have always found a way to get around various controls.
It turns into shadow IT, right?
And we called it shadow IT, exactly. But now shadow IT has gone from, buying a printer, right, that you're not supposed to have on your desk to, taking data out of the company and ingesting it through a service using personal means to do so.
Right. The good old days when that annoying printer wasn't supposed to be there.
That's right. Or that switch or that hub or whatever, somebody installs a hub and it just wreaks havoc on the network. So, yeah.
Exactly. Okay. The reason I'm asking is, can you use the AI to actually watch these people as well? I mean, you mentioned it with your DLP stuff, but can you actually utilize AI to do it that way?
The thing with DLP is, and I go back to, one of the services that I can tell you that Raytheon was the co-author of it. I'm not going to say the company who actually released it, but it was very thorough in that we had to spend about 6 to 8 months just analyzing data of activity within the organization to make absolutely certain that we weren't going to disrupt services for these individuals who are using sensitive data every day. Finance, HR, legal, for example, right? There's a lot of data that traverses the internal network. And the problem I have with AI systems, in any systems, even some of the automated systems I have now, is they're based on a core fundamental of standard that doesn't apply to every company. And if anywhere the one size fits all mantra doesn't fit, it's especially with the use of data in organizations. Some are using it in different ways. Some are using it in innocent ways. Some are using it in very critical ways. And what do I mean by that? There's a very large organization that still prides themselves on having the ability to do DLP, especially with email. But what I'm finding is that their service has to be constantly maintained and changed by an individual because it's not properly identifying the data, meaning it's not setting the right criteria. So if it has a number that's 9 digits long, is that a social security number, or is that an account number, or is it just some other sort of identifier that means nothing? And what's happening is you end up with a tremendous amount of false positives, and those false positives leads to disruption of activity that disrupts people being able to do their jobs. So when I implemented one of the most aggressive, I would say, DLP solutions I've ever put in place, the $10 billion company is 15,000 employees. I mean, we had to make sure that we were not going to disrupt the apple cart under any circumstance. So we had to phase it in. Now you could argue that we could have the AI do that, but again, how long are you going to teach it, right? Even some of the machine learning systems that are out there for email and email security, they need 45 days minimum just to learn how the email is traversed and used and who you're talking to, whatever. So it knows when it's turned on and starts making decisions on what it should and shouldn't allow to get to your inbox, that it's not going to block everything. So regardless of whether it's AI, it's still going to learn, and it may learn faster, but I don't think there's going to be too many solutions out of the box that are going to fit everybody, because this is not something that is going to be an easy one-size-fits-all.
Thanks for that. Been asking folks lately, when they're dealing with, different vendors, security vendors and whatnot, what are like a couple of questions that you ask vendors? When you're looking at different solutions, maybe it's a DLP one, maybe it's something that's boasting AI. Trying to arm our folks out in the audience with some, smart questions to ask the vendor community, because, sometimes, you find yourself at RSA or at a SecureWorld event, right? But sometimes it sounds too good to be true. So what are a couple of questions to arm themselves with as they're meeting with vendors in the future?
So one of the most common things that I run into with these interactive solutions that are out there is you always hear the words guardrails, right? And they talk about how they have guardrails for certain services that are already built in. What if I want to build a guardrail? What if I want to prevent that service from accessing data that user shouldn't be able to access either, right? How can I do that? The other thing is, what kind of direct interaction capability do you need to have into our environment? I can tell you flat out, we do not let any third parties connect to anything us directly. In fact, I got one right now where we're building literally what I like to call the in-law suite of, of connectivities, where we kind of meet in the middle, and then they pull from us, but they're like, oh yeah, we need to install this directly on your database server. No. So, because the thing you got to keep in mind is that as soon as you give a direct connection, whatever that connection has access to within your network, that same service can now see all of that, right? So I always like to ask them, how are you connecting? And then where's the data going, right? That's connected to there. And of course, the common question I always ask is, okay, can we control it? I can tell you that there is a very large organization that, and anybody wants to message me afterwards, I can tell you who it is. They have literally built their own AI service, because I think that they took a step back and they went, okay, if anybody's going to benefit from our customers' data, it's going to be us. And so you're going to find a lot of private AI cloud solutions. We're doing it, but there's going to be some hybrid there, right? Where there's some, but the idea, I think the elephant in the room is, everybody wants an easy way. Oh, we can plug it into this service and they can generate all this stuff for us. Yeah, but you really don't have control of the data. So if you really want to control the data, you got to think about, okay, if you have an AI team, machine learning team, ask them, could you get some of these models, could you do this that they're doing? Can you do this as well? And what would it take to actually do that? And that's something that we're constantly asking ourselves too, is like, hey, could we take your model and put it in our lab and use it there? I could tell you, of the 4 companies I've asked that question, only 3 of them have said yes, that we could actually do that. So that means that we're using their language model to train only for our environment, but then we have some stipulations with respect to interacting back to their cloud. So I know it seems like a loaded answer, but there's a lot there when you're talking about data associated with your organization, because everybody wants to benefit, especially the company that's hosting the service.
Appreciate that. Thank you so much. That concludes our time together. Watch out for that microphone. It's trying to get you.
Yeah.
But appreciate your time and the presentation. If you wouldn't mind, finish typing out some of the answers there in the chat. But we'll get everybody out to another networking break, and then we've got another round of sessions coming up after that. Just a reminder, we have the CPE email, so credit for your participation today, going out about an hour after that last session. So watch for that. If you don't see that for any reason, you can shoot me an email, Tom B, or info@secureworld.io. But thanks again, Mike. Wonderful to have you. Reach out to Mike if we didn't cover your question, or if you want to find out more about that company he was moving to. So that concludes Insider Threat Actors and Artificial Intelligence. We will see you at the break and our next round of sessions.